All right, Mrs. Bimbo Oloyede, veteran of the broadcasting industry, it's a pleasure to have you on Deep Dive. Good morning.
Good morning.
There's a lot I want to talk to you about journalism, especially broadcast journalism, but I'd like to start from where it all began, about 67 years ago when you were born, somewhere in Lagos. You were born into the family of a police officer. Your father was a police officer. In fact, became Deputy Inspector General of Police.
That's right.
What was it like growing up in the house of a police officer? I bet he was a disciplinarian and things like that. And what values did he pass on to you?
Yes, he was the disciplinarian, and I'm not sure that we really we did not kick against it because I don't think we knew anything else. Most of the members of our family were somehow not necessarily in law enforcement, but they were all disciplinarians because that was what we knew growing up in a Saro household. Let me put it like that, because my mother was her family were originally from Sierra Leone. His family also were originally from Sierra Leone, at least his father. But he had grown up in Lagos. You know, I think he came to Nigeria when he was about 7 or 8 years old, something like that. So yes, we were disciplined. There was a strict routine at home, which again we didn't kick against because, well, who were we going to complain to anyway? And frankly, it made sense. You know, you got up in the morning, you went to school, you came back, you had your lunch, you had your rest, you got up, you did your homework, you played a little bit, you had your supper, you went to bed, and so it continued. But when I was 8, actually, I left Nigeria and I went to England to go to school. Again, under quite strict circumstances because it was a boarding school.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, everything was done by the book. There was routine. There was time for this and time for that. So it is something that I grew up understanding.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so at a point, it is not people disciplining you. It is you disciplining yourself because that's just the way it goes.
And it was seen that police officers then had a lot more respect and dignity in society than we have now, where, you know,
yes, I must agree with that. But then, especially the rank that he held, I mean, I don't think there was any question about whether he should or should not be
respect. Exactly. I mean, you talked about the Saro origin, and I mean, I read somewhere that you also a descendant of Herbert Macaulay, the great Herbert Macaulay.
Yes, my mother's side.
From your mother's side, exactly, from Sierra Leone. What did that rich history, what values did you tap from that rich history? Was it something that you looked to in your nuclear family, that huge status to live up to?
I don't think that we were aware as children that, you know, we had that type of background, that we had that kind of history. But then if I look at the way my mother was also brought up, you know, by a woman who was married to a reverend, by a woman who was a grand niece of, what was he, a grand niece or a niece to Herbert Macaulay. Those values that they had grown up with trickled down. So we didn't know where these ideas were coming from. We didn't know, you know, where this way of behaving came from. We just knew that this is what you do, and we accepted it, and you know, and here we are.
Yeah. You were talking about the fact that you went to United Kingdom to further your studies.
To begin my studies.
To begin your studies, because you were 8 exactly. But then you went to study, drama at University, United Kingdom. But most profoundly was that you became the first Black woman to head a school in the UK.
Girl.
Girl, let me put it that way.
Because
about girl.
Secondary school.
Yeah.
Yes. So I was 17 when I left secondary school after doing my A-levels. And so my senior year, that was upper sixth, as it was called in those days. Yes, I was, surprisingly to me anyway, I was made the head girl.
What was it like shattering that glass ceiling, becoming the first black girl to head a school in the United Kingdom?
You see, these days we give a lot of credence to these things. We seem to live with labeling on a daily basis. At the time, I had no idea that I was. Of course, I knew I was black. I knew that I was the only black girl in the school at the time, because there had been, I had my cousins had been at that school before me, who were black, and others, came in after me, and some of my schoolmates. But I was not aware that I was the first black girl to head a private school in England. Incidentally, my first cousin, 8-9 years before me, was also the first black boy to head a private school in England. So it was not, it did not seem to me at the time to be a big deal. It is probably later on, growing up, looking back in hindsight and thinking, so actually that was the case.
Interesting experience.
Yes. I mean, I don't think it changed me. And I don't think I changed anything, particularly in the school by being the head girl. But
it was something for many other people to look after you shattered that ceiling. But then you came back to Nigeria in 76, I guess, or you got back into the NT in 76.
No. What actually happened was that I came back to Nigeria in 70. I think it was late 74. But I was employed by the then NBC TV in Lagos. 75.
Yeah.
Yes. And at that time, actually, NTA did not yet exist.
Yeah.
So when NTA was established, then one of the innovations that they wanted to bring, into being was what they called network news. And, they were looking for fresh faces, fresh voices, etc., etc. And I was called upon.
Yeah, but that, you weren't just called upon, because there was some interesting debate around you being called upon to be the face of the 9 p.m. news. There was some sort of a debate even in Parliament whether a woman, should be the face, of newscasting in Nigeria. How did you feel hearing those kinds of, conversations, whether or not, a woman should be the face of national TV in the country? And interestingly, you became the first face.
Well, when you're involved, when you're in the field and you're doing a job, quite honestly, unless somebody tells you that there is a controversy somewhere, you are probably not even aware. I mean, there are a variety of things that happened whilst I was at the NTA behind the scenes that honestly I had no idea these things were going on. I would just, maybe after the issue had happened, then somebody would say, "Oh, by the way, did you know?" And I would say, "No." I mean, who would tell me? I wasn't there when they were having, such discussions. So yes. But how do you make progress if you don't do things differently from time to time?
Yeah.
So perhaps it was actually that discussion that made it. How would I put it now? That put me in a position where I was literally given 24 hours notice, because I wasn't told until the day before that, by the way, make sure that you're here by such and such a time tomorrow, because this is what you're going to do. I mean, that's what my controller told me. So if there were issues going on behind or before that instruction was given to me, I really didn't know. I did not know, because at that point, I wasn't even in presentation. I was in production. That's what I was employed to do. I was an assistant producer. I was in the drama department. So if there was a hullabaloo about who was going to be on TV and who was not going to be on TV, it mattered nothing to me because I was, in any case, behind the camera, not in front of it.
Interesting. I mean, you worked with the finest journalists and producers in one of the best days and the best times that the NTA had in our country. But 4 years later, did you get tired? You had to leave with your darling husband to start a new company. Why did you have to leave so soon in one of the best times in NTA's history in our country?
I'm trying to remember who left first, whether he left before I did. I think he left before I did, actually. Yes, he did. He left before me. I did not get tired as such because the job is an exciting one. But I did become disillusioned. I was disillusioned because when we started, we knew that we were putting together very good bulletins. We knew that we were shocking some people here and there. And we also had somebody behind us, our director of news, who was fearless. So it really mattered not to him if the security people called him 1,000 times a day, asking him where did he get this information, who told him this, and who told us that. But by the time I took the decision to leave, things had changed. At this point, everything had sort of mellowed down, and I did not feel that what we were actually delivering was news. I mean, some of the stories, yes, but generally, I felt that it had become too watered down. And I was not, because I was not personally convinced, I also became aware that my performance was no longer convincing.
I mean, I just wanted to take you on your darling husband who you spent 40 of the best years of your life with. But you touched on something very interesting now, the fact that news became watered down in the NTA. And that brings me to a very important question that I've been longing to ask you. Firstly, do you think that the idea in our country where presidents have to sign on broadcasting licenses, is antiquated? Should that still exist in modern society, where everyone who needs a broadcasting license has to queue up in Abuja to get the signage, of the president? And that somehow puts some sort of big brother, on broadcasting media across the country where you really can't,
I don't think that it has anything to do with the president, If, for instance, let's look at it from this perspective. We're all human beings. Everybody has their preferences, their biases. So if I am somebody that is particularly outspoken and I don't belong to your party and I don't agree with what you do, and yet I want to have a license, but my fate is tied to your benevolence, let me put it that way. That fate is really, it is dead on arrival. Exactly. That license is not coming my way.
Exactly.
Until somebody else becomes president who perhaps favors me.
Yeah.
So that is not, I don't think that should be entertained. I don't think it's right.
Exactly. And to talk about, newscasters and journalists, what I've noticed, you spent decades and decades casting the news. And it didn't matter. The dictum was that the person casting the news, the story didn't have to be about the journalist in itself. And your job was simply to cast the news without biases. But it was seeing that the biggest broadcasting houses across the world today are not just in Nigeria, are newscasters who have opinions. And people want to watch people with opinions and not just the regular, newscasting. What do you make of this change in broadcasting where news anchors now have opinions, not just merely casting the news?
I think that if one wants to be professional, if you want to be a news anchor, then I think there are certain things that go with it. And there are certain expectations that if others don't have, I, having done it, I think that there are certain expectations that should also go with being a news anchor. Now, if you want to be, it's like even being economist, all right? If you want to express your opinions as a writer, then have your column. And we know that you are speaking as an independent, but we don't expect the editor of the newspaper to edit stories favoring one side, against the other. So for me, if you want to be, if you have an opinion that you think needs to be shared, then the position or the desk of a news anchor is not where that opinion should be shared. That is my opinion.
So you don't think that newscasters should have opinions on air? So what we see now on most televisions and even radio stations, where news analyses are done by news anchors or newscasters on breakfast shows or late night shows, you don't think that's good for journalism?
I don't think it is good for, it's not so much that it's not good for journalism, but I think that it could be misleading for members of the public who are watching. Now, I don't want a situation where you are a news anchor and you are delivering a story, and to the best of your ability and to the best of your knowledge, this is a story that has been written without bias, and you are delivering it in that same way without bias. But because 2 days ago you came up with a different program that clearly showed your opinion about A, B, or C, I, as the viewer, sitting down and watching you and listening to you, what is going through my mind is, okay, is this guy speaking as an independent, objective individual, or is he speaking as the person who gave the opinion that he shared 3 days ago? Through which ear do I hear this news story? Through which lens do I watch this news report? And it becomes confusing. So the person who is sitting down at home doesn't really know exactly where he is. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being a professional that is seen not to have an opinion. Because I think that is the safest way to play the game of being a news anchor. As I said, if you want to have an opinion, have it in some other situation. But I don't think that we should be sending out mixed messages.
Yeah. Talking about where we are as a country, today, I mean, you spend time in journalism at the times where, for instance, the NTA, you produced programs that engendered or fostered national unity. You told stories that brought us together, that amplified the best of us. Today, our society is so polarized. Politics doesn't help, perhaps poverty and unemployment. In these cloudy times, what role do you think the media should be playing in healing our country, in speaking hope to citizens, and in bringing us together and amplifying the best of us?
I think it is a role that should be looked at very seriously. We know that there is bad news, but we also know that it is possible to suggest solutions for the bad news that we see and the bad news that we hear. So I think that it is a responsibility of anybody who is in the media to try their best to build rather than to destroy. We are a developing country. So each person has to ask themselves the question, how do I want my country to develop? Do I want my country to develop along the lines of productivity, of education, of good health, etc., etc.? Or do I want a situation where everybody is fighting against everybody else, and as a result of that, they are always distracting people from progress and moving forward? So if as a journalist or anybody who is in the media, if they can answer that question truthfully and come to the realization that they actually have a positive role to play, then when they're writing, when they're speaking, when they are creating, it will be with that kind of mindset. It will be with the mindset of progress. It will be with the mindset of development. It will be with the mindset of encouragement and hope. We know that things happen, and I mean, if there's an accident and people die, you cannot say that they did not die.
Yeah.
You cannot say that there was no accident.
Yeah.
But sometimes, even out of that accident, and even out of the loss of those lives, sometimes there is still hope. Sometimes something happens. Something happens as a result of it that still gives hope. And rather than be purely sensational, let us instead have that mindset of being developmental.
I mean, you hear the arguments where people say sensationalism is what sells. In the media, that dog bites the man is no news, is when a man bites the dog, right. That's the news. But you make an interesting point, because even when the founders of Al Jazeera started the news network, they said they wanted to tell that the US media told stories of where the bombs were leaving, and they wanted to tell the stories of the houses where those bombs were dropping in the Middle East, and to humanize the people that the bombs were killing. And perhaps there's a role for us to play in that. But the question comes back to profitability, because our media houses in Nigeria are bleeding. They're struggling to make profits. How do they find the middle ground between duty to country and profitability of the enterprise?
I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to conscience. It comes down to conscience. It comes down to truth. It comes down to service. I do believe that if you do something the right way, and you are able to sustain it, I think that there are people who watch, who listen, who are probably in a position to do something to assist, to make sure that you keep going until you have reached a point where you are actually afloat. And after that comes profitability. I think that there is something to be said for having a good name and having a good reputation. Because at the end of the day, you see, sensationalism is like a shooting star. All right? It's really bright, but it disappears. So we want something that is constant. And it is that consistency. It is that perseverance. It's that upholding of standards over a period of time that eventually is going to bring that profitability. That is my belief.
I mean, you once talked about the burden of being a newscaster, where whether or not you've had a bad morning, you had to show up and cast the news, because the entire country, perhaps because at the time everybody watched you on TV. But is that a burden that most newscasters carry today? And how difficult is that burden, that despite what you're facing in your immediate life, you have to show up and cast the news dispassionately because people were counting on you to get the news?
There's nothing you can do about life happening. Nobody can stop some of the tragedies that occur. And these tragedies may not necessarily be just linked to death. There are other types of tragedies. So you have a job. Fortunately or unfortunately, your job places you in the public eye. So the public might be empathetic or sympathetic towards you if they know that you have an issue, have a problem. But that does not mean that when the drums roll or the music starts, that news will not be told. So it becomes a personal decision. Can I do this job despite the life that is happening to me right now? If I think I can do it and do it convincingly, then I will go ahead. If I think I will let down people, let down myself, let down my employers, then I will need to tell my employers that this is what is happening to me right now. And I'm sorry, but I don't think I can do it now. Because that responsibility to deliver that information does not diminish. The information still has to be shared, and somebody has to share it. So if the information is sacred, and it is, then you have to ensure that it is delivered in the right way. So if you can't do it, then don't do it. But if you can,
then you go ahead.
Go ahead.
I mean, I wrap this conversation by going back to talk about, your husband for 40 years, whom you left the NTA to join, to build a company, together. He was a master of his craft, one of the finest producers, the country ever saw. What was he like behind the scenes in production? What was he like? What was the maestro like?
In production, probably a bit of a tyrant. I remember that he had this favorite saying, the tape would roll, the camera would, the cameraman would be working, the actors would do whatever it is that they have to do, and then he would say cut, and then he would say glorified, excellent, rubbish. So those who could take it would. Those who couldn't take it objected very strongly, but usually people in the industry, they knew him anyway, so they knew he was going to say something like that. But occasionally when he shot commercials and some of the cast were people who were not within the industry, or I think it threw them.
He produced the headmaster, the village headmaster?
Yes, he did. He did for quite a lot. I don't know, about 9 years or 7 or 8 years, something like that at the time. So he was very thorough about the work that he did, and he didn't joke with it. He was very, very serious about it, even though he had a huge sense of humor. But he saw things, visually. He saw things from a creative perspective and a dramatic perspective, if you will. So yes, I think people generally enjoyed working with him, because he was, let me say, he was an actor's director. Many a time you find nowadays, you don't find that many directors getting the best out of the actors, because some of them have not been through the process themselves. So they don't produce, they don't know how to produce, I don't say they don't know how to direct, but they don't know how to act. So they don't know the process that an actor goes through to bring a character to life. So as a director who had that experience, he knew how to get the best out of you. So probably he was in a position where he got generally better performances from those that he was directing than quite a few others who directed.
What was he like as a husband?
Oh, an interesting man. Interesting, because of his sense of humor, and a very blunt person. So there is no way that he's going to tell you that. He's never going to tell you that something is gray. It is either black
or white.
And you live with it. You take it that way.
I mean, and how did your union rub off on both your professional careers, especially yours?
Well, I think he met me, or rather I met him in TV, all right? And he was there when I became a news anchor. So, and there were several spin-offs from being a news anchor. So it wasn't a question of, there were things that I was doing that he was not aware of from the word go. So, somebody perhaps who was not in the industry, if I was married to somebody who was not in the industry, who did not understand what we were doing, there's a possibility that they may not have fully embraced the different manifestations of the job that I did as my core job. So, comparing here, traveling here to do this, outside broadcasts, training, a variety of things.
Yeah.
He was conversant with them, and so he was also comfortable with them.
Yeah.
And he never gave me any stress, let me put it that way, about doing those things, What would have been the reason? What would have been his excuse?
Yeah.
You knew about this right from the word go.
Yeah. I mean, you've lived 67 wonderful years.
69.
Oh, dear Lord. 69. You're almost 70.
Yes.
40 years in broadcasting. Do you have any regrets whatsoever looking back at what sitting down from here I would consider a beautiful career?
No regrets. No regrets. I think that the things that I've done as a result of being in broadcasting I may not have been able to do those things if I had not been a broadcaster, which I never planned, but hey, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I don't have any regrets being in broadcasting. If I regret might not be the word. If you're a creative person, you have a lot of ideas for programs. Perhaps some of the ideas that I had could have become programs which may have been running today. I may not have been the person producing. I may not have been the person presenting. But the fact that some of those ideas did not come to fruition may be cause for, I wish I had done this. But then, when there is life.
So you're not slowing down anytime soon?
Well, it's not a matter of slowing. I have slowed down, but that doesn't, but my brain has not. I still have ideas for programs. And so now, instead of thinking about a program that I am going to do myself, I think it's now time for me to share some of these ideas with people who I think are capable of presenting and producing the way that I believe I could have done it myself, rather than just have that idea in, on a sheet of paper or on on my laptop screen. Yes. I think they should come to life.
I mean, it's a fascinating way to end our conversation. It's been incredible talking to you and going through your life's journey. It's a pleasure to have you on this show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Glad to have been here.